On September 11th, 2006, thousands from all over the world gathered in New York City, New York. They wore black shirts, reading Investigate 9/11, and held banners that read, "Ask questions, demand answers." This day marked the 5th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Although the 9/11 Commission report had been published over 2 years prior, many Americans and citizens worldwide remained convinced that the truth was being withheld from the public. Why? Why was a growing percentage of the world population becoming increasingly skeptical of the events of September 11th? Was it a natural inclination towards believing the worst about the United States government? Or was it a legitimate concern that only grew more powerful with time? The 9/11 Truth Movement includes academics, engineers, physicists, firefighters, intelligence officials, and some of the very people whose lives have been shattered since September 11th. Were they all delirious?
You should not be here.
No, you've got it all wrong.
We're honoring the fallen heroes from 9/11.
As are we.
No, you're not. No, you are not.
I feel so uncomfortable.
I'm sorry.
That next year, I'm not coming here.
Or were they a concerned group of individuals taking the necessary steps to prevent the United States from slipping into its darkest era yet? Was September 11th a surprise attack on America by 19 Islamic terrorists? Or something else entirely?
George Bush has spent an uncomfortable day with his people trying to explain away why he failed to pass on warnings the White House had received before September the 11th that terrorists were planning to hijack American aircraft. What happened that day has cast a shadow over just about every area of American life. Now, one of the country's best-known journalists has said that the American response to the so-called war on terrorism has created a climate of effective censorship in a land claiming to be the home of free speech.
There's never been an American war, small or large, in which access has been so limited as this one. The belief runs so strong in both the political and military leadership that those who control the images will control public opinion.
Does it suggest that there was somebody on the inside? He kind of compared it to the Godfather story, you know, where the gun was placed in the men's room.
There is also a possibility this could be some kind of inside job.
May it have been an inside job? Might these people have gotten help from the inside?
I was speculating about that along with others early this morning, but now there's a lot more evidence that suggests it's almost certainly the case.
It's an obscene comparison. I'm not sure I like it, but there was a time in South Africa that people would put flaming tires around people's necks if they dissented. The fear is that you'll be necklaced here. You'll have a flaming tire of lack of patriotism put around your neck. Now, it's that fear that keeps journalists from asking the toughest of the tough questions and to continue to bore in on the tough questions so often.
People let us stay out of our business.
A country that hides something is a country that is afraid of getting caught.
And in particular, this Bush administration, who is as tight with Saudi Arabia as you can get.
I know the right question, but you know what? This is not exactly the right time to ask it.
The president's father used to stay with the bin Laden family when he would go to Saudi Arabia.
It starts with a feeling of patriotism within oneself.
In the past, though, the FBI has sometimes made problems worse by ignoring or denying them.
FBI management intentionally and repeatedly thwarted and obstructed my attempts to launch a more comprehensive investigation to identify and to neutralize terrorists.
They realize what an entertainment-oriented society ours has become.
To the families and victims, of September 11th. On behalf of John Vincent, Barry Carmody, and myself, we're sorry.
And, I want to say quietly, but as forcefully as I can, that I hope this doesn't go any further. It's gone too far already. I am appalled by it.
On September 13th, the United States government declares that it has overwhelming evidence that bin Laden is responsible for the attacks. The Taliban offers to hand over Osama bin Laden if the United States can provide evidence.
Our position in this regard is that if America have evidence and proofs, they should produce it, and we are ready for the trial of Osama bin Laden in the light of evidence.
Are you willing to hand Osama bin Laden to the United States or not?
No. Without evidence, no.
September 23rd, 2001.
States. The Secretary of State said the administration would soon be able to document its case in public against the Al-Qaeda network and Osama bin Laden.
And I think it'll be persuasive.
By the next day, the White House was already backpedaling.
But is there any plan to present public evidence so that, the average citizen, not just Americans, but people all over the world, can understand the case against
Well, I think as Secretary Powell said, there's hope to do that and to do so in a timely fashion over some course of time. But I think the American people also understand that there are going to be times when that information cannot immediately be forthcoming, and the American people seem to be accepting of that.
It seems as though you're asking everyone to trust you.
This information has yet to be provided to the public. Instead of taking credit, bin Laden denies involvement in the attacks 3 times. December 13th, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden describes the attacks along with Khaled al-Harbi. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt. International establishments question the authenticity of the tape. December 26th, 2001. A Taliban official claims that he has attended the funeral of Osama bin Laden. The next day, a video believed to be recorded on November 19th is broadcast, in which bin Laden praises the attack, but takes no responsibility. The next bin Laden video would not appear until October 29th, 2004, days before the presidential election. The video is described as the clearest claim of responsibility for 9/11. And when questioned why bin Laden's most wanted poster does not indict him for 9/11, the chief of investigative publicity for the FBI, Rex Toome, replied,
9/11 is not mentioned on bin Laden's most wanted poster is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11. Clearly, I couldn't really believe what I had just heard, so I repeated it, and he said, yes, that is correct. The FBI has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11.
What evidence do they have? 2 bags belonging to Mohammed Atta checked in at Portland Airport but failed to make Flight 11 at Boston, containing a 757 video tour and flight manual, an Arab-English dictionary, a handheld flight computer, a Quran, and his will. Why would Atta take his will onto a plane that would be destroyed in a fiery inferno? Marwan al-Sheikh's rental car, discovered at Logan Airport, containing an Arabic flight manual, an airport restricted area pass, and documents from Huffman Aviation. Nawaf al-Hazmi's rental car, discovered at Dulles Airport, containing Mohammed Atta's instructions, a check for a flight school in Phoenix, 4 drawings of a 757 cockpit, a knife, and maps of Washington and New York. Satam al-Sakami's passport, discovered below the Twin Towers.
Well, Dan, not far from here, a passerby found the passport of one of the hijackers.
How does a passport fly out of a man's pocket through a 400-mile-per-hour airplane crash, survive 9,000 gallons of jet fuel, and land intact on a sidewalk 1,000 feet below? Mahed Maked and Nawaf al-Hazmi's ID cards discovered in the wreckage at the Pentagon. An ID, Saeed al-Ghamdi's passport, Ahmed al-Nami's driver's license, passport photos, and a business card found in Shanksville. The list goes on. A former high-level intelligence official commented to New Yorker magazine, "Whatever trail was left deliberately for the FBI to chase."
They used hundreds of different payphones and cell phones, often with prepaid calling cards that are extremely difficult to trace. And they made sure that all the money sent to them to fund their attacks was wired in small amounts to avoid detection.
Small amounts? Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, the director of the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the ISI, was reported to have wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta in August 2001. This transfer was facilitated by Saeed Sheikh, the man who allegedly kidnapped and murdered Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, who is investigating the ties between the ISI and Islamic militants.
And the Pakistanis, of course, if you know your history, have only been a couple of degrees of separation away from the so-called Al-Qaeda hijackers.
The ISI has had a long-standing relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, dating back to the 1980s with the establishment of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which would evolve into Al-Qaeda.
I focus in on the wire transfer that General Mahmoud Ahmed wired to Muhammad Atta right before 9/11. That's pretty crucial because General Mahmoud Ahmed was actually meeting with key Washington, D.C. insiders, Senator Bob Graham, Porter Goss, the future director of CIA, on the morning of 9/11. And he has a relationship not only with the CIA, but with Dick Armitage at State Department, Mark Grossman at State Department.
Yes. Are you aware of the reports at the time that ISI chief was in Washington on September 11 and on September 10th, $100,000 was wired from Pakistan to these groups here in this area? And why he was here, was meeting with you or anybody in the administration?
I have not seen that report, and he was certainly not meeting with me. Yes?
In the White House transcript of this exchange, which is delivered to the press, the information about the ISI is censored. Bob Graham and Porter Goss will later co-head a joint inquiry which publicly claims that the Bush administration received absolutely no intelligence that could have prevented the attacks. The meeting begins at 8 a.m. over breakfast at the Capitol building and lasts through Flight 175's impact with the South Tower. During his visit, which began on September 4th, Ahmed would also meet with the present CIA director, George Tenet. A month later, after reports of the transfer between himself and Atta, Mahmoud Ahmed retires from the ISI. The 9/11 Commission report will later conclude that they saw no evidence that any foreign government or foreign government official supplied any funding. The Commission decided not only to omit the information, but to deny it entirely.
On page 172 of your report, the 911 report, you state, quote, "The U.S. government has not been able to determine the origin of the money used in the 911 attacks. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance," end quote. How can you state that the question of who bankrolled the deaths of 3,000 American people on September 11th is, quote, of little practical significance?
Because it costs so little money. That's the awful thing about it. It costs less than $500,000. That's why it was so hard to trace. We were able to find pieces of the $500,000, but it came in very small pieces.
And you said earlier $500,000 to do the 9/11 operation. Well, we know that $100,000 was wired to Muhammad Atta directly from the head of Pakistani ISI.
Well, I'm not aware of $100,000, but Pakistan, I think, is the most dangerous country in the world.
Why was there such a vested interest in covering up the transaction between the ISI and Muhammad Atta?
And let's talk about that wire transfer, because Governor Kaine had no basis for denial, because the FBI and the Wall Street Journal confirmed the General Mahmoud Ahmed wire transfer I'm talking about. But the 9/11 Commission deliberately said that funding is not important and assigning blame is not important to them, but it is to us.
As if their funding was not suspicious enough, a number of hijackers reportedly trained at U.S. military bases.
As hard as this is to believe that 2 of the alleged terrorists involved in what happened on Tuesday may have attended schools run by the U.S. military. Now, this is according to a senior defense official.
Ahmed al-Nami, Ahmed al-Ghamdi, and Saeed al-Ghamdi listed their address on both driver's licenses and car registrations as the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. Mohammed Atta reportedly graduated from the U.S. International Office School at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. In response to a Freedom of Information Act, Captain Jason Taylor confirmed that a Mohammed Atta trained there between 1998 and 1999, but did not verify if it was the same person. Abdulaziz Al-Amari attended Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Saeed al-Ghamdi and others attended the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, as confirmed by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Butler, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. American media ceases investigation when the Air Force says, "We are probably not talking about the same people." 2 of the hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Madar, rented an apartment from and lived with an FBI informant. Curiously, a number of them were reported to still be alive after the attack. Finally, we were led to believe that the alleged hijackers were fundamentalist Muslims spending their final days preparing for paradise. Yet, in the week before the attacks, a number of them would drink, visit strip clubs, and solicit prostitutes.
By all accounts, Atta and his cousin kept to themselves, except for last Thursday at this bar in Hollywood, Florida. It's believed both men came in, drank heavily, and then refused to pay the bill.
And the guy got very, very offended, and he said to me, "Oh, I can pay my bill. I'm an airline pilot." And I was like, okay.
Mahed Maked is spotted several times at a porn shop. Hamza al-Ghamdi ordered a porno in his hotel on September 10th. The mayor of Paterson, New Jersey, states that they are spotted more at go-go clubs than at mosques. Regardless of their actions, some of the hijackers' presence was known as early as 2000.
What did we know? When did we know it?
That's what some congressmen are asking now, and asking quite loudly.
Did we know the year before 9/11 that one of the hijackers was a terrorist threat?
Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer has gone public with his charge that Able Danger, a military intelligence project he worked with in 2000, identified Mohammed Atta, even pulled up his picture along with 3 other 9/11 hijackers as possible al-Qaeda members.
We found the identities of 4 of the 9/11 hijackers prior to 9/11.
But he says beginning in September 2000, 3 meetings he set up with the FBI were each canceled by military lawyers. Schaefer also says he remembers telling then 9/11 Commission staff at a meeting in Afghanistan about Atta and what the intelligence unit found back in 2000. And he was surprised that it did not show up in the Commission's report.
I'm told confidently by the person who did move the material over that the 9/11 Commission received 2 briefcase-size containers of documents. I can tell you for a fact that would not be 1/20th of the information that Able Danger consisted of during the time we spent.
A 9/11 Commission spokesman said nothing they got from the Pentagon in early 2004 backed up Schaefer's claim, quote, "None of the documents turned over to the Commission mentioned Mohammed Atta or any of the other future hijackers."
Where is it? Where's the beef? Where's the substance? Where is this mysterious chart that purportedly says that Atta was connected in some real way to these other hijackers? We'd love to see it.
The company responsible for the chart, Orion Scientific Systems, would claim that only 2 charts were produced and that Atta was not present on either one.
Throw them all out, John. These are all the charts. Spread them out. These are all Orion-produced charts. These charts were all done by the data mining efforts. So the Orion Corporation lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee staff. All data mining efforts, and yet the company said to the Senate Judiciary staff, "We don't have any of those charts. They're not ours." Well, here they are. and their logos are on each one of them. Well, Mr. Chairman, at least 2 of the 5 people that were going to appear today were threatened with removal of their security clearances if they continue to talk about this. This is going back.
Are you at liberty to identify who those 2 are?
I will to you. I'd rather do it privately since the Defense Department has chosen not to allow anyone to testify, but I will provide that information to the committee.
For the life of me, I don't understand why, as I understand it, I stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand the witnesses we assumed we were going to get to hear from the Defense Department have been pulled. They may be or may not be in the room, but have been instructed that they cannot testify. I think that's a big mistake.
This is actually a chart of Al-Qaeda and the various cells around the world. Much of this data, most of it was obtained prior to 9/11 by the work of Able Danger. As you see, there is an actual photograph of Muhammad Atta.
What does that depict generally?
It depicts the organizational and activity associations of Al-Qaeda operatives that were involved in 9/11 and related events.
And at the time, if the commission had looked into this in early 2004, the charts that had Muhammad Atta on it still existed. There was a chart in Mr. Smith's office. There was the chart that still should have been in the Defense Intelligence Agency because it wasn't destroyed within Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer's files until the spring of 2004. The same with the chart that Mr. Smith had.
Our support to Able Danger became severely restricted and ultimately shut down due to intelligence oversight concerns. I was supported vigorously by both the LEWA and the INSCOM chain of commands, and we actively worked to overcome this shutdown for the next several months. In the midst of this shutdown, I, along with one of my analysts, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Terry Stevens, were forced to destroy all data, charts, and other analytical products that we had not already passed on to SOCOM related to Able Danger.
Another former DoD official will testify today that he was ordered to destroy up to 2.5 terabytes of data. Now, I don't know what a terabyte of data is, so we contacted the Library of Congress. It's equal to 1/4 of all the entire written collection that the Library of Congress maintains.
Are you in a position to evaluate the credibility of Captain Philpott, Colonel Schaefer, Mr. Westphal, Ms. Preissler, Mr. J.D. Smith as to their credibility when they say they saw Muhammad Atta on a chart?
Yes, sir. I believe them implicitly.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was the first member of Able Danger to go public, has now been told in writing by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he can't speak to members of Congress or their staff without prior approval. And now a security clearance, which allowed him to deal with classified information, has been pulled. The congressman says Schaefer has been gagged, punished for speaking up.
The official response to Able Danger began in September 2005 with a letter from 9/11 Commissioner Slade Gordon to Senator Arlen Specter. Gordon concludes by saying that since Condoleezza Rice, President Bush, and the White House denied that Able Danger identified the 9/11 hijackers, it never happened. A 6-month investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded in December 2006 that Able Danger did not identify Muhammad Atta or any other 9/11 hijacker. Can we be certain that the hijackers were radical Muslims on a suicide mission? Or is there a possibility that they were trained, funded, and protected in our own country?
Major Deskin?
Yes, ma'am, Sergeant Rorta.
Yes.
I'm just letting you know for information we're having an exercise, SF exercise. We're having a comm out.
Okay.
Guys.
Happy, thanks.
All right, thank you. Back.
Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would scramble fighter jets to intercept errant aircraft 67 times. Interceptions are routine and usually occur within 10 minutes of a sign of trouble, such as permanently losing radio contact and transponder signal or flying off course. On the morning of September 11th, according to official accounts, 4 commercial airliners would be off course and out of communication, and not one of them would be intercepted.
How is it that on 4 separate occasions on one day that $1 trillion military and intelligence infrastructure could fail?
Never did in anybody's thought process about how to protect America did we ever think that the evildoers would fly not 1, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets. Never.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One drill, called Amalgam Virgo, was conducted on June 1st and 2nd, 2001, and simulated successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats, including an airborne hijacking. One plan would simulate the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the Capitol. The second part of the exercise, which was planned but not executed before 9/11, involved 2 planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents would hijack the planes and divert them to secure locations. And on its cover, Osama bin Laden. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
The answer to the question is no, did not impair our response. In fact, General Eberhart, who was then the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, as he testified in front of the 9/11 Commission, I believe he told them that it enhanced our ability to respond. There were 2 CPXs. There was 1 Department of Justice exercise that didn't have anything to do with the other 3. And there was an actual operation ongoing because there was some Russian bomber activity up near Alaska.
So, did the war games ultimately help or hinder our response? September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. Vigilant Guardian is a branch of Global Guardian, a mass Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. Originally scheduled to take place in late October, Global Guardian was moved to September. The exercise is reportedly canceled after the second Twin Tower is hit. 3 E-4B Doomsday planes remain airborne.
2 government sources familiar with the incident tell CNN it was a military aircraft, but say the details are classified. This comparison of the CNN video and an official Air Force photo suggests the mystery plane is among the military's most sensitive aircraft, an Air Force E-4B. The E-4B is a state-of-the-art flying command post, built and equipped for one reason: to keep the government running no matter what, even in the event of a nuclear war. Ask the Pentagon, and it insists this is not a military aircraft, and there is no mention of it in the official report of the 9/11 Commission. The Pentagon, the Secret Service, and the FAA all say they, at least for public consumption, have no explanation of the giant plane over the president's house, just as the smoke began to rise across the river at the Pentagon.
Barksdale Air Force Base also participated in Global Guardian. Instead of returning directly to Washington, D.C., President Bush would fly to both Barksdale and Offutt Air Force Base before returning to the White House. Another drill, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets to Canada and Alaska to to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs on a training mission. Northern Vigilance also placed inputs onto military radar screens. Also referred to as phantoms, inputs are simulated errant aircraft, which appear real to those participating in the exercise.
We fought many phantoms that day.
3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located 15 miles from the Pentagon, are flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina. Fort Belvoir, an Army base 10 miles south of the Pentagon, is preparing for an exercise intended to test security in case of a terrorist attack. Employees in the Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7 continue preparations for Tripod, a biological attack drill scheduled for September 12th. Finally, the National Reconnaissance Office in Virginia begins a drill at 8:45, conducted by a team from the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their building. Also, a number of war games were being conducted that have yet to be fully disclosed.
Ask about the war games that were planned for 9/11.
Commissioner Gorelick.
Could you please be quiet? We have only a few minutes with General Myers. I'd like to ask a question. General Myers, I'm sorry.
I would ask, please, people in the audience to be quiet if you want to stay here. Submitted, son.
Sir, statement. This commission has not answered my questions. I'm walking out. It's a farce. I will. Thank you.
So let me get this straight. On the morning of 9/11, the United States is running drills in which hijacked aircraft go in and out of radar, fighter jets are flown out of the United States, and planes are crashed into buildings. What a coincidence.
And in terms of what motivated me to bring all the aircraft down, as you see one thing happen, that's an accident. When you see two of the same thing occur, it's a pattern. But when you see three of the same thing occur, it's a program. And so at that point, I decided to bring all the aircraft down.
And so, at 9:45, all airborne planes were forced to land. This order applied to all civilian aircraft. Certain military planes were allowed to remain airborne. By 12:16 that afternoon, the FAA managed to ground over 4,000 planes without incident.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
.37, Arlington, Virginia. American Airlines Flight 77 allegedly crashes into the ground floor of the Pentagon. Pentagon authorities will deny that the building had anti-aircraft defense. The FBI arrives within minutes, and the site is declared a federal crime scene, becoming their exclusive responsibility. With the help of civilians, they comb the Pentagon lawn for debris, and within 24 hours, they had confiscated every known video of the attack. Pentagon officials initially denied that any of their cameras captured the event. However, on March 7, 2002, 5 images taken by a security camera from across the heliport are released. For years, these 5 frames were the only public footage of the Pentagon attack. This would change on October 14, 2004, when Scott Bingham would file a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit requesting videotapes that captured the impact of Flight 77. Special Agent Jacqueline McGuire of the FBI located a CD-ROM that contains copies of 2 time-lapse recordings made by security cameras. Released on March 16, 2006. A video taken from a Citgo gas station, which is open only to Pentagon employees. Released on September 15, 2006. And the Doubletree Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. Released on December 7, 2006. Agent McGuire concluded that the FBI possessed 85 videotapes that might be potentially responsive. As of this date, we have no clear images of what happened at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. The official story goes as such. American Airlines Flight 77 was taken over by 5 hijackers, led by Hani Hanjour. Hanjour entered the United States in 1996 to become a professional airline pilot. He would not complete a single course.
It's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Average or below average piloting skills. English was very poor, uneventful from our perspective.
The 9/11 Commission concludes that Hanjour was perhaps the most experienced and highly trained pilot.
Flight 93's hijacker, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, was a former Saudi fighter pilot. How could Hanjour be more experienced than him? On the morning of 9/11, Hani Hanjour and his 4 accomplices traveled to Dulles International Airport outside of Washington, D.C. They had spent the weeks beforehand at the Valencia Motel in Laurel, Maryland, 6 miles from the National Security Agency. All 5 will set off metal detectors and be subjected to additional screening, yet all of them proceed to board American Airlines Flight 77, which is described by the Washington Post as unusually light on passengers. Out of 188 seats, 64 would be filled. In fact, all 4 planes involved in 9/11 would be at approximately 30% capacity. The hijackers will board alongside Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, and a number of employees from Boeing, Raytheon, the Department of Defense, Lockheed Martin, American Airlines, the Navy, Army, and other government agencies. The pilots were Officer David Charlebois and Captain Charles Burlingame. Charles Frank Burlingame III, an aeronautical engineer and a graduate of both the Naval Academy and Top Gun Fighter Pilot School, flew F-4 fighter jets and developed anti-terrorism strategies at the Pentagon before retiring in 1989 to take a job at American Airlines. He would remain active in the reserves and anti-terrorism exercises until 1996. His Boeing 757 would be crashed into the very section of the Pentagon he used to work in. The hijackers would have only moments to subdue both Charlebois and Burlingame, remove them from the cockpit, and retain control of the airplane. Yet, the plane is hijacked without incident at 8:51 and makes an unauthorized turn to the south 3 minutes later. No mayday, no hijack code, no sign of struggle. Flight 77 will fly all the way back from the Kentucky-Ohio border, coasting for another 43 minutes against its flight path before crashing into the Pentagon without any military interception. Had Hani Hanjour wanted to inflict maximum damage, all he had to do was continue his trajectory and nose down into the roof of the Pentagon. Instead, he begins a complicated 330-degree turn, dropping 7,000 feet and exposing himself for an additional 3 minutes while executing a maneuver described by experienced pilots as nearly impossible, requiring professional expertise. In essence, an amateur pilot considered a waste of resources by instructors who was unable to control a small Cessna in August 2001, executed this nearly impossible maneuver in a 757 with skilled precision a month later.
Todd Lewis is working radar at Dulles Airport.
One of my colleagues saw a target moving from the northwest to the southeast.
And it was just a countdown, 10 miles west.
And she notified the supervisor.
9 miles west.
But nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight. I thought that Langley had scrambled some fighters and...
It was almost a sense of relief. This must be a fighter.
Maybe one of them got up there.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast, like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
This must be one of our guys, sent in, scrambled to patrol our capital.
The 757 will descend over Columbia Pike, flying adjacent to the Sheraton Hotel, Virginia Department of Transportation, Navy Annex, and fly past the Citgo gas station before crossing Washington Boulevard. 5 light poles are knocked out of the ground. One reportedly strikes a Washington, D.C. taxi driven by Lloyd England. Flight 77 manages to hit the only section that was reinforced to withstand a terrorist attack, including reinforced steel and blast-resistant Kevlar windows 1.5 inches thick. The renovation, planning for which had begun in 1991, was only days away from completion. Had the plane struck anywhere else, the casualties and damage would have been far greater. An area that normally would have housed up to 5,000 occupants yielded 125 casualties. The Pentagon's outer wall had a hole approximately 20 feet in diameter on the first and second floor, and visible damage 90 feet across the first floor.
I would say if it was 16 feet diameter, 20 feet tops, that's what would start me so curious. As I was trying to find something, there was no marks on the grass. Something never hit the ground. It didn't hit the heliport. I mean, it was a precision or awfully lucky hit. I mean, I don't know how it didn't bounce. I don't know how it hit directly in the side of the building without touching the ground, going as fast as it obviously was going. But I can't believe the thing is more than a garage door. And again, the classic airplane crash has wreckage. I mean, they found axles from the Ryder truck in Oklahoma City. I can't believe they can't find an engine.
Opinions differ at this point. People that believe a 757 hit the Pentagon, and people that don't. Those that believe a 757 did hit are fueled by the damage path, wreckage outside the building, and eyewitness testimony.
While we were sitting in the office, and all of a sudden we heard some rumbling, something is kind of hitting us. Very imminent things could happen. So we look at each other, and it really, the noise is unbearable. And at the last moment, my brother jumped out the office.
I heard about the very weak jet sound. Looks like just up to here. I just look at the outside, big black wings coming that way. And then I just running out, and then 2-3 seconds, boom.
We're used to seeing planes.
Maybe a 20-passenger corporate jet, no markings on the side.
I saw a plane going down
big plane, commercial liner type.
And I saw this jet coming in, and it was really low, and it was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage.
This particular plane was awful low, and as we were coming down on a 395, it came across in front of us, and it was low.
Coming in at a shallow angle like it was landing right into the side of the Pentagon.
It just happened. It was really amazing.
Huge explosion.
So you actually saw the plane impact the side of the building?
Yes, I did.
Just one plane?
Just one plane.
I basically made a turn too early and ended up right in front of the Pentagon on Route 27, which goes just, I didn't even know it was the Pentagon. I mean, I've grown up in this area, but I just am basically never over there. Besides, you can't really tell it's five-sided anyway, so I didn't even know it was a Pentagon, but I was just in traffic. My main focus was that I was late for this service, and we were stuck in totally standstill traffic, just sitting dead still on the highway. And basically, without warning, there was just the sensation of something coming over the top of us. It seems the plane was so low that it hit a light pole that was just on the edge of the highway, on the far side there. Before it came over the highway, it clipped this pole, which I heard ended up being knocked over and hitting a taxi, which was near my car.
Okay, my name is Lloyd England. 9/11, I was driving my car on my way home. This airplane flew over top of my car. It was real close. Glass, a loud noise happened, and the pole came through the dashboard right through the car. I stopped the car in the middle of the street. It didn't stop straight, it stopped at an angle. As far as the plane went through, it didn't come back in until I stopped the car and got out. Then I looked for the plane. There was no plane, but it was quiet. If had nobody seemed to have indicated where something happened, I wouldn't have known. And I was there. I mean, I'm there. And the plane, the wing spread would have been from that house, maybe halfway in my house. And the big wing, the big motors underneath of them. And nothing was left out?
Those that think a 757 did not hit are fueled by the damage to the building and lack of large structural debris outside, particularly the lack of damage from the wings and vertical stabilizer, and the fact that those objects, as well as the engines, were never fully recovered.
Is there anything left of the aircraft at all?
First of all, the question about the aircraft, there are some small pieces of aircraft visible from the interior during this firefighting operation I'm talking about, but not large sections. In other words, there's no fuselage sections and that sort of thing.
They said it was a plane, and I didn't see any pieces of any plane, and I couldn't believe that a plane hit the building.
There are numerous parts to a 757 that are virtually indestructible. To date, we have not seen a single piece positively identified as Flight 77's. The fact that an exit hole inside the Pentagon is not explained by any official report on the attack. The fact that there was no impact damage on the lawn. And the fact that out of the videos that have been released, none of them clearly show a 757. The outer wall will collapse 20 minutes later, leaving a hole approximately 70 feet wide. What hit the building may be important. However, our focus should be on why it was hit in the first place. The section hit was the headquarters of Naval Operations, Naval Intelligence, and the Navy Command Center. Army personnel were also killed. A number of accountants and budget analysts were also present at the time and killed in the attack. The Arlington County After Action Report states that important budget information was in the damaged area. It's interesting that 24 hours prior, Donald Rumsfeld publicly made this announcement.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
According to the 9/11 Commission report, the military was unprepared for the transformation of commercial aircraft into weapons of mass destruction.
Counterterrorism forecaster Marvin Citron authored a report in 1994 for the Department of Defense, warning of Washington's vulnerability to terrorist attack.
We predicted a plane could have crashed into the Pentagon.
That's about as specific as you can be. If you made a right turn at the Washington Monument, you could hit the Pentagon. A left turn, you could hit the White House.
Back on October 24th, 2000, the Pentagon conducted MASSCOW, a mass casualty exercise which simulated the impact of a Boeing 757 into the building.
I'm very curious, and as time goes by, it makes you more curious as you have time to dwell on the details and all the information that's becoming available. I can't drive my car that well, but I can't imagine somebody just climbing behind the wheel of an airplane and doing what they did and doing it so well. Basically, it was the strangest day I've ever spent in my entire life. It was like in slow motion. I get chills every time I hear the audio. Physically, I swear I get chills every time I watch the video. I can feel the heat. I can smell the fuel, or I can smell the burning. There's been a lot of curiosity, I think, in time, but even for me, who was there. I still have questions of, did I really see what I think I saw? You know, when you're led to believe and you think you believe what you think you saw, I think that you begin to buy into it. But the more you dwell on it and the more the evidence comes forward, the questions get larger and larger and larger. I'd like some conclusion. I mean, I'm sure the families would, and I'm sure the military knows a lot more than we do in the government. But I'm just astounded that they don't share more of the information that's available.
If the government was 100% forthcoming and wanted to squelch any doubt as to what happened, why have they controlled the evidence so strongly? Why is there no positive identification of Flight 77? Why, when Vice President Dick Cheney was aware of an incoming aircraft up to 50 miles away, were employees allowed to remain in the building? Had a single alarm gone off inside the Pentagon, 125 people would be alive today, and hundreds more would not be suffering.
And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
Norman Mineta's testimony would be completely unreported by the 9/11 Commission. It would also be censored from the online archives of commission hearings. A spokesperson from the National Archive claimed that it was a technical snafu. The 9/11 Commission will later conclude that Vice President Dick Cheney did not reach the bunker until 9:58.
My main concern is that in your testimony, you stated that Vice President Dick Cheney came into the POEC office at 9:20 when you arrived, and he was already there. He's gone in front of Meet the Press, and he said that he was there at 9:38.
They did that because they'd received a report that an airplane was headed for the White House.
This is Flight 77, which had left Dulles.
Flight 77. It left Dulles. As best we can tell, they came initially at the White House.
The plane actually circled the White House?
Didn't circle it, but was headed on a track into it.
Tracking it by radar.
And when it entered the danger zone and looked like it was headed for the White House was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement. The plane obviously didn't hit the White House, turned away and we think flew a circle and came back in and then hit the Pentagon.
Yet the 9/11 Commission report puts him there at 9:58 that morning. 9:58? Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but it puts him half an hour later. So I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but to the best of your recollection, was Vice President Dick Cheney already there at 9:20?
The flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon. This was
before Flight 77.
Before American Airlines went into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Norman Mineta was in the bunker with Cheney, and so the fact that that wasn't in the 9/11 Commission report was rather odd, don't you think? Yeah. Who was that young man? Did anybody ask who that young man was?
How could Dick Cheney, or anyone in the administration, especially after an aide warned him a plane was 50 miles out and 2 planes had already struck the World Trade Center, allow the Pentagon to be struck?
You know, am I prepared to believe that Dick Cheney would be capable of knowing about this kind of attack on the Pentagon, for example, and allowing it to happen? Well, from what I know about Dick Cheney, yeah.
Holy fucking Jesus!
9:59, New York City, New York. The South Tower of the World Trade Center, 110 stories tall, collapses to the ground in approximately 10 seconds. 29 minutes later, the North Tower follows suit, also collapsing in approximately 10 seconds. Later that evening, at 5:20, World Trade Center Building 7, 47 stories tall, collapses to the ground in under 7 seconds. The official explanation is that falling debris from the North Tower created a series of fires inside the building. If this is true, it would be the third steel-frame skyscraper in history to completely collapse because of damage and fire. The first two would be the Twin Towers. February 23rd, 1991. One Meridian Plaza, a 38-story skyscraper in Philadelphia, burned for 18 hours across 8 floors. It is later described by officials as the most significant fire of the century. It did not collapse. October 17, 2004. A 56-story skyscraper in Caracas, Venezuela, built in 1976, burned for over 17 hours and spread across 26 floors. It did not collapse. February 13th, 1975. A 3-alarm fire broke out between the 9th and 14th floors of the North Tower.
No one died. The building was unoccupied. The fire began in an electrical wiring closet on the 11th floor. There should have been fire stops to prevent it from spreading, but there weren't. The fire spread to 6 other floors. Even without a sprinkling system, fire department officials and building officials here say that there's no chance the World Trade Center could become a type of towering inferno.
The fire is so intense, it leads to the installation of sprinkler systems, which would come in handy on May 19th, 1975, when 7 fires strike the complex. The South Tower had garbage fires dispersed between the 25th and 36th floor, and the North Tower had a fire on the 11th floor. 6 of the fires were minor, but the 7th on the 32nd floor of the South Tower caused heavy damage. Guess what? They did not collapse. September 11th, 2001. 2 110-story skyscrapers, completed in 1973, burned for 56 minutes over 8 floors and 103 minutes over 5 floors, respectively, before collapsing completely to the ground. Some argue that this was due to the construction of the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers were composed of 200,000 tons of steel and 425,000 cubic yards of concrete. The core of each tower was a rectangular pillar 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 steel box columns ranging from 36 by 16 to 52 by 22 inches. The North Tower was completed in 1970, standing at 1,368 feet tall, and the South Tower was completed in 1973, reaching 1,362 feet tall, making them the tallest buildings in the world at the time. They were designed to withstand multiple impacts from a Boeing 707, the largest aircraft at its time. An analysis, released in 1964, claims that the buildings were investigated and found to be safe in an assumed collision with a 707 traveling at 600 miles per hour. Such collision would result in only local damage which could not cause collapse or substantial damage to the building. A 707 has 4 engines instead of 2, and its cruise speed is 607 miles per hour. The Boeing 767s that struck the North and South Tower were traveling at 440 and 540 miles per hour, respectively.
Breaking news on WCBS 880, right here, right now.
I believe if we can get in touch with him, we have a witness who saw what happened at the World Trade Center.
This apparently was a commuter plane that smashed into it with such force that the windows of the Pick-a-Bagel smashed with a big bang. Everybody was very frightened.
Did you manage to see what kind of plane it was?
No, I couldn't tell. It was a smaller plane. It looked like a smaller plane, but I couldn't tell. I'm not really sure.
A medium-sized body plane with engines on both sides. Almost like a gray-black color in nature on the plane.
I would say it wasn't a huge jet, but it was a plane that sounded like it was a fighter jet overhead.
I work right next door at 74 Trinity Place. We heard the first one come in. I didn't know what it was. It sounded like a missile.
Oh, my God, Ed, another plane just hit the World Trade Center. Another plane. It was a medium-sized plane. Unbelievable.
It would appear, Jim, as if there's more smoke coming from the ground.
And we used to have another, things have fallen to the ground and are burning. And we
One gentleman told me he was on the 65th floor standing next to an elevator when the elevator exploded and knocked him out of his shoes. Another woman said that she was working on the 49th floor and she's seen people in the stairwells with burns, broken arms. People are passing out of the stairwells from the heat. She says there's a lot of heat and smoke. It's a horrible scene here. I'm live at Broadway and Fulton. Allison Keyes, WCBS 880 News.
All right, thank you, Allison.
Basically, there's people running around down the street. All the glass panes that are on the bottom part of the World Trade Center are all blown out. When I first heard it and ran over to the window, it looked like there was fire on the bottom floor.
Well, they're ahead there. And all of this, the world...
Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Oh, my God, the building fell. Are you there? The building just fell.
You said it sounded like the 4th of July. You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July over the East River.
Oh, my
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Right now, police have to determine is whether that explosion was caused from the initial impact of the plane or whether it was something that was exploded on the ground. Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself.
By that evening, eyewitnesses and experts alike were rushing to defend the official narrative of events, claiming that raging jet fuel fires melted the steel inside the Twin Towers.
I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
When one of those airplanes crashed into one of the towers, it was the equivalent of a 6-point earthquake.
Marlene Davis is the Dean of Architecture at the University of Tennessee. She calls the 110-story tall twin tower tube structures. That means there are no internal columns holding it up.
You know, when we saw this yesterday, people said, oh my goodness, there was a bomb on there. There must have been a bomb that collapsed. Must have been a bomb below. Right, that finished the job. Well, it turns out we heard from experts who said that, you know what, the fire on those floors probably 1,500 degrees. Steel can only withstand so much because the steel structure that holds the building up was on the outside, and essentially the building started to melt and it gave way and it toppled.
Engineers suspect the temperatures inside the crash areas could have quickly reached well over 1,000 degrees, perhaps approaching 2,000 degrees, beyond the melting point of any steel.
They were not designed, perhaps, to take a direct strike from something the size of a 737 or an Airbus, perhaps fully loaded with fuel. Steel will melt.
Physics professor and explosives expert Van Romero.
Even if there was no secondary explosives in the building, hitting the having the airplane hit the building where it did, a large amount of weight above the damaged location, that damaged location being further damaged by the fire, that structure could no longer support the weight above it, and the collapse ensues.
Numerous individuals, including some of the architects themselves, would claim that plane crashes were never taken into consideration and that the building was doomed to failure.
Hyman Brown was the project engineer on the Twin Towers, the man on the ground in charge of making sure the buildings were built right, the way it was designed.
Structural steel is fireproof to last between 1 and 2 hours, which it did, and then steel melts.
Each tower was built around a central core. That core kept the building up, supporting the tower's so-called dead weight. But when steel melts, according to Brown, like dominoes,